Hello everyone, welcome to Calm Waters. Today I would like to chat with you all about thoughts on fragility. I recently read a book that was very enlightening called Antifragile, How to Gain from Uncertainty. While reading the book, I gained many insights and would like to share my understanding and thoughts on fragility and antifragility. Before we dive into how to do this, let's first ponder what it means to be fragile. Only recently did I realize that, like myself, one who once seemed successful and a white-collar worker is in fact part of a highly fragile group. I recall a news story from 2 years back. Does anyone remember it? A highly educated woman working in finance in Hong Kong who earned a substantial salary and graduated from a top-tier university. A truly outstanding young woman. But just 2 years ago, something happened. The salaries in the finance sector dropped sharply. I wonder if folks still recall that due to the broader external factors, his salary plunged far more than just being halved. He could no longer afford his mortgage payments, so he chose to end his life by jumping from a building. At the time, he had bought a multi-million-dollar home in Hong Kong. This tragedy sparked widespread public debate at the time. I noticed many netizens criticized him for buying a home recklessly, with two main root causes identified. First, he was overly optimistic and ignored black swan risks. As we mentioned, he had a strong academic record, graduated from a top-tier school, and had an impressive work history and excellent skills. At first glance, he was on a rising career path and still quite young even if laid off. He felt confident he could quickly land a new job with his strong credentials. In his mind, the future seemed smooth and trouble-free. He never considered extreme scenarios, and honestly, if I were him, I'd think the same way too. If I were him, I believe my future was bright and secure. I just want to buy this house I've had my eye on. Is that a problem? But black swan events often strike without warning. Just like that sudden mass pay cut in the finance sector. A systemic risk no one can fully shield themselves from. So in the industry storm, even top-tier personal skills can seem utterly powerless. This also brings to mind my own experiences. I once worked in the internet sector, relying on my youth, decent degree, and solid resume. And I was confident in my own abilities, so I felt that even if I got laid off, I could soon find new jobs at other companies. But now, if I look back, I still possess some degree of antifragility at present. As we just mentioned, I'm still young, and my salary isn't that high companies can afford it. My resume is decent, and things look fine for now, but we must keep our eyes on the future. As time goes on, perhaps within 5 years, my antifragility may vanish entirely. Because by then, I'd be a woman in tech facing the 35 crisis, struggling to find satisfying work in this industry, wouldn't I? Right. So because of this, I must find an anti-fragile path for myself 5 or even 10 years from now. For me, starting a business is that path. Second, he overestimated his risk resilience. His choices lacked built-in redundancy. I was deeply impressed by one netizen who left a comment with a salary of 60 to 70k. Would you dare buy a HK home worth tens of millions? This is not something folks without means or pedigree can afford. Do you truly think you can leap class tiers just by your skills and your academic credentials? He put it very plainly. Why would he, on a salary of 60 to 70k, dare to buy a property worth tens of millions? The core reason, I think, is that he calculated things far too precisely. Suppose he earns 80k monthly, pays 60k in mortgage, keeps 10k for living costs, leaves 10k surplus. Just looking at this ledger, these numbers seem fine at first glance, but the fatal flaw in this calculation is that it leaves no room in space. For folks like us who are not involved, the risks in this decision are quite obvious. If anything went awry or some mishap struck, or if something urgent came up at home, he might not be able to repay. But for those deep in the situation, they are in a career growth phase. The pay is high and seems quite stable, plus he is young and healthy, his parents are still young and have health insurance. There seems no sudden, urgent need for cash to arise. So one just tightens and thinks one can push through. But precisely because of this meticulous planning, our lives became extremely fragile, with virtually no capacity to withstand risks, ultimately leading to tragedy. What's especially sad is that he was a top finance school graduate. lacked even basic thought, caution, and hid for black swan events that is truly disheartening. So let us return to the core question. What exactly is fragility? Just like that young woman there whose life became fragile precisely because of the house purchasing decision. This is one example. Like vases and glass bottles or chips and eggs, these things are fragile as well. And also those professionals with narrow skill sets. Businesses with single client sources or teams overly reliant on one key staff member or the boss, these are also fragile. My initial thought was that fragility means lacking any sort of resilience. It means weak risk resilience prone to damage or collapse under stress, shocks, or the passage of time, and cannot withstand any strain. We call this fragility. But if we stop at this level, our grasp of fragility remains rather narrow and shallow indeed. In the book on fragility, the author Nassim Taleb proposes a triad: fragility, robustness, and antifragility. Fragility means disliking volatility and uncertainty. It breaks or collapses under stress or shocks, like a glass cup that shatters when dropped. He called this fragility. I feel this definition is far more profound than my own prior grasp. If we think deeper, we'll see that the core of risk resistance, I see still, implies proactive action. It requires deliberate effort from us. But business volatility and uncertainty highlight the core issue. The mere existence of such things makes them inherently fragile. Any slight shift from the outside can still impact it deeply. I wonder if everyone has caught the difference between these two. One still requires us to take action on our own. Just your mere existence lacks resilience. Any external factor might arrive and potentially shatter it entirely. So you clearly sees that its own rejection of external fluctuations and uncertainties, or its inability to handle these aspects, this would make it inherently frail. So the first step is to recognize whether we are in a fragile state. This is our first act in fighting fragility. Great. Now in part 2, we'll discuss how to combat fragility. Right, at the start of this book, Nassim Nicholas Taleb posed a great question. What is the opposite of fragility? The answer Nassim Taleb gave was one that upended many people's views or reshaped their understanding. He mentioned in the triad framework 3 concepts: fragility, resilience, and antifragility. Fragility, as we just said, refers to business volatility and uncertainty. Any stress or shock would cause the matter itself to suffer damage or even collapse entirely. Good, let us go ahead. Or perhaps an object, a person, or an event that can withstand shocks and retain its state through such fluctuations, then return to its original form once stressed, like a rubber ball that springs back after being squashed. This is robustness. Is this the optimal form? And it is not that robustness means no change occurs during fluctuations. It suffers no harm, but gains nothing either. So he introduced a key concept, antifragility. He meant that there's a higher tier than just robustness itself. When things face volatility, stress, and uncertainty, it's not just about staying the same. It's about gaining and growing stronger from it. For instance, when you train your muscles, it can cause minor tears through constant repair and growth. This makes our muscles and our whole body much stronger over time. So this is about antifragility. The core idea of antifragility is that fighting fragility and boosting resilience are just the basics. The ultimate fix is to build antifragility. This idea was truly eye-opening to me. When faced with such fluctuations, most people might think, how can I just avoid or escape it? The better or ultimate fix is figuring out how to gain from such uncertainty. The 2008 financial crisis was just like this. As with my past thoughts and the many books I've read, I often pondered, how could I, before this financial crisis hits, spot the signs and safeguard some of my assets and wealth? But after reading his theory, I suddenly wondered, could I not just preserve my wealth during such a financial crisis, but perhaps do more than that? More importantly, one could actually gain more wealth in this crisis. For instance, if I had 100,000 yuan, could I turn it into a million, 10 million? In truth, this was something I never dared to imagine before. Back then, I was too narrow-minded or overly cautious, thinking that just keeping safe my 100,000 was already great. But Nassim Nicholas Taleb tells us that keeping those 100K isn't the best option at all. What we need to do is turn this 100,000 yuan into a million amid this crisis. This part really struck me as quite intriguing. How to do this? I've summed up 5 key approaches. The first approach is to actively embrace moderate stress and build robustness through it. Robustness often begins with willingly facing a bit of pressure. I was deeply moved by one story. The book mentioned a similar case too. I saw in a video that someone tried to build a poison-proof body by injecting snake venom in small doses. His body's toxin resistance grew stronger, so even if he was later bitten by a venomous snake, his symptoms were mild, thus he achieved what's called a robust constitution. As mentioned in the book, it was some empress who, to prevent others from poisoning her and endangering her life, would regularly consume tiny, minuscule doses of poison. When someone tried to poison him, his body's antibodies kicked in and rendered it harmless. This is another tale that left a deep impression. I also recall a time when I was learning a foreign language. The period when I improved most was during my business trips abroad. To be frank, my English isn't great. In a foreign land, you must communicate just to survive. Even if your speech is halting and awkward, you still have to speak. Like when you need to ride a bus or buy things, you just have to speak. But precisely this pressure to speak out loud, it pushed me from that early stage where I'd hesitate and struggle to utter just a few words to a point where I could speak confidently, even with grammar flaws. The same goes for improving one's physical health. When I was young, I was frail and often ill. Whenever I caught a cold, my mom would take me to the hospital for medicine and IV drips. Once I started college, since seeing a doctor cost my own money, I stopped going and toughed it out. I didn't expect that I caught cold far less often now. My immunity has steadily improved. Since I started working, I rarely take medicine and rely solely on my own immunity to fight cold. Now I feel my body is at such a peak, yet this ties closely to our personal growth and development. Because right now, we are in the most vigorous phase of our entire lives. Now, for instance, if I catch a cold, I recover in 2 to 3 days at most, and never more than a week, with mild symptoms. So from all the examples we've discussed above, we can derive our first principle: the need for a healthy dose of external pressure can push us to become far more resilient. This has given me a fresh and new insight. When we feel particularly fragile at this moment, we might first ask ourselves, have we become too comfortable, lacking the needed pressure? At this point, you should deliberately add some stress. Take my current job. For instance, if it's going smoothly with no setbacks at all, that's precisely a dangerous sign of fragility. Or one might dwell on past successes, unaware that these very experiences may have already, or are slowly, become outdated. If you don't keep learning and stay updated on industry trends, you may be left behind. Or perhaps I'm not yet sharp enough on industry trends and shifts. Just like the Titanic come before it hit the iceberg, yet riddled with hidden dangers all along. By the time we spot the iceberg, it is far too late to turn back. So to sum up, when you feel you're not much of anything and quite fragile, a touch of measured external pressure is needed. Okay, the second approach is break your fixation on certainty and inject randomness. There was one line in the book that struck me. It was my greatest takeaway from the read. Many people hold a core misconception that randomness equates to risk and removing it would eliminate all risk. The moment I read that line, my heart jolted and I got goosebumps all over. That is true. I used to think the same, and I once believed randomness meant risk. If I don't know where my clients will be tomorrow, or if I'll earn anything at all next month, that feels very risky indeed. But Nassim Nicholas Taleb in his book posed a question, which is more fragile, a taxi driver or a regular office worker? His answer was the latter. Because taxi life seems full of randomness, you never know how many fares you get tomorrow yet. Precisely because this uncertainty breeds stress, it pushes him to keep adapting and sharpen his service skills, thus gaining antifragility from volatility and doubt. In my view, the fragility of these two jobs varies by person and depends largely on the specific context they find themselves in. But one thing is clear: those who cling to the status quo and fear change are bound to be fragile, for change will always come. You just don't know when it will come, or how big or small its impact will be. So if you're not truly prepared and you're running from it, then its arrival will surely deliver a deadly blow to you. And as many people dislike randomness, and I used to hate it too, because we lacked past experience of gaining from it. Imagine suppose that volatility could bring us some gains instead, and such gains would far outweigh any losses I might have to bear. Would we still fear randomness? Then that is clearly not true. Why do kids in Jiangsu, Zhejiang, Shanghai love business so much? Because they saw from a young age, look at my toys or perhaps my books here. I might buy it for 20 RMB, then rent it to my classmates. And in 10 days, I could recoup that cost entirely. I might earn 40 bucks, which would let me buy a brand new book instead. They gained from this uncertainty, which made them deeply passionate about the whole endeavor. If I look back, the path someone like me has taken was shaped by constant reinforcement of seeking stability. For instance, when in middle school, parents would tell you that if you fail to get into high school, you would never get to study more. And when in high school, if you did not make it to university, you would work hard and keep studying. Once we graduated, our parents wanted us to be teachers, civil servants, or doctors, stable jobs to build a life. And society tells you, so-and-so was laid off, or so-and-so and so-and-so. And so, another round of cuts now. More are laid off, and yet more grads can't find jobs. Just another batch of jobless graduates. These prestigious graduates could not find jobs, so they became food couriers or taxi drivers and so on. So we feel quite anxious and seek to find a stable establishment job instead. Precisely because of this, we had little to no exposure to true randomness in the past. His reaction was fear and flight. No gains were drawn from randomness at all. Because our past lives were so stable, everything followed a script, just going with the flow and doing things that seemed secure. We've never gained from randomness in any way. Thus, we reject randomness then. When I read the reviews, many people also resonated strongly with this line. They all share a common sentiment. I get the logic, but society won't let us act this way. We can do some random things, but if your job is unstable, you might face certain challenges in society. But we must admit that shifting mindsets is tough, especially when just one book or essay struggles to overturn beliefs someone has held for decades. Indeed, for instance, I don't know how many folks this episode might influence. But if we truly wish to change, we might start with small things in our daily lives. Intentionally add some controllable randomness. It is key. How should one introduce randomness? To me, it's a natural process that doesn't need forced effort. There are two key points. First, set up a systematic set of rules to define intervention limits. The core of this framework lies in discerning when to intervene and when to let the system run on its own. For instance, if my work still faces fresh challenges, that means the system is evolving, so no intervention is needed. But if my content has passed the phase from 0 to 1 in creation, had fallen into a repetitive rut at that point, I needed to step in and inject some randomness. I remember a few years back when I worked at a company, and at that time I was involved in content marketing. In the first 3 months, I felt immense stress and often couldn't sleep at night, thinking about how to finish tasks and trying all sorts of ways to meet my goals. Once I'd worked for 3 or 4 months and found a final working path, my boss then asked me to keep repeating this exact method. Since you've already found this effective approach, all you need to do is repeat it. But for myself, this day after day repetition caused me immense distress. And once I realized the job task couldn't be changed, I quit and sought out new challenges instead. And when I look at that business now, I see the person who took over is still doing the exact same things I did years ago, including many templates, methods, and styles that are already left behind. And over these past few years, they've kept using the same approach or path, which still feels, how to say, not quite ideal to me. So looking back now, at that time I left the job, I didn't really understand then what uncertainty or fragility even meant. But that job resignation was in fact my gut-driven attempt to embrace randomness. Okay, this is the first way to embrace randomness. The second is to act to shift the status quo. There's a joke I find quite amusing. 5 frogs sit on a lily pad basking in the sun, and 4 decide to leap into the pond to play. So how many frogs remain now on the lily pad? Feel free to share your answer on the live chat. The answer is 5, since intent isn't action. Those 4 frogs merely thought about jumping into play, but they never actually leapt, so the situation stayed unchanged. I think this joke is quite amusing and carries a deep lesson that before we truly take action, decisions we make or thoughts we conjure up in our minds are of no use. So to inject randomness and break this fragile status quo, the key is to act, not just to think this is crucial. Okay, so after all that, the key point we're after is to deliberately inject randomness into our lives. Okay, the second tip, anti-fragile practice, is to leave residual room and build a buffer for risks. Residual means leaving room. This is the most direct way to fight fragility. In life, we often face the choice of whether to leave ample buffer room. For instance, the recent trend of special forces style tourism, where tight schedules and heavy tasks make our trips extremely packed. So when we plan our itineraries, we tend to pack them to the brim with activities. Say fly in the morning, then once you land, play for hours, then take a high-speed rail to a new city in the afternoon. And then what at night? Fill each hour to the brim. Many people, and indeed in society, there is a trend that promotes special forces style tourism. Hey, you'd think, look how great my planning skills are. Just look at how well it worked. I visited 3 cities in 2 days. It seems great, but in truth, it leaves little room for setbacks. For instance, if a flight is delayed, once it is, it will greatly disrupt our future plans and schedule. A direct consequence of the delay would be, if it's delayed by hours, or even half a day, our booked high-speed rail tickets and train tickets might just be wasted. If we booked a hotel as well, you might have to cancel that hotel booking. You'd have to negotiate, and perhaps the tickets you booked for the next day were booked. But this single flight delay triggered a chain of events that pushed our remaining plans far beyond our control entirely. We have to either pay a much higher price to act now and cut our losses. For instance, this flight might be delayed for hours, but there is another flight now that departs right away and can get you to your afternoon destination. But his ticket is pricey. Since it's for a last-minute flight, this one is the most costly. Would you be willing to pay those few thousand more to cut your losses now? Some people might just grit their teeth and pay those fees, since you have no choice. At this point, a delay might affect some of your scheduled plans for tomorrow, possibly leading to missed events or other issues. So you have no choice but to accept this costly option, which is why I don't want this to happen to me. Personally, there are many folks who live a moonlight lifestyle, spending all their monthly income with no savings and no emergency funds left over. Many people, once they get their paychecks, plow them into investments, real estate, and leave little cash on hand. This financial setup is indeed quite risky and unstable, including myself. I don't tend to keep large sums in long-term fixed deposits, since I can't tell when I might need cash all of a sudden. If you save for 10 or 20 years, there's no way. So one should try to avoid doing such things too. And even the allocation of public resources aims for peak efficiency. No space is left unused. Everything is arranged with perfect precision. In the short term, this seems to save costs. Yet, the pivotal shift hinges on whether any unexpected events arise. There was a line in the book that struck me as quite clever. It said that, in the short term, redundancy buffer seems like a waste. If no mishap occurs, then the redundancy buffer would serve no purpose. But the key point is that accidents will always happen, though we don't know when they might strike. To me, keeping ample redundancy means giving oneself more options and several fallback routes. I have deeply felt this myself. I used to be extremely optimistic and didn't believe any mishaps could occur. I'm doing well now and things are going quite smoothly. But lately, I've come to see that mishaps can strike at any moment. We need to be well-prepared money, and this or that, so I won't push myself into a truly desperate or hopeless situation. Well, perhaps, in many cases, indeed, in most situations, keeping a surplus of perch is just a minor waste. But at this point, we need to do the math. The first tally is, what cost do we pay for fresh fish, and can we afford that cost? The second calculation is, if we leave no buffer, what losses might we face if a risk hits, and what is the worst-case scenario, can we afford it? If, suppose I've spent all my money already, and on the surface, my job still seems quite stable, with income coming in each month. But if Say some crisis were to strike and we had no funds left. What sort of losses might that potentially cause? When you make such a calculation, most people might just then realize the necessity of having a safety net. Yet many folks don't realize they should tally this sum. So for myself, I'd prefer to keep more options and fallback routes open for the future. And you? Well, this is the second way to boost our antifragility. Fourth, reject the middle path. Embrace extreme asymmetry. In Antifragile, the barbell strategy is Nassim Nicholas Taleb's core idea, relying on polarized dual setups. Discard the middle path balance to gain antifragility losses. Help gains are boundless. As for this point here, we touched on this in our previous episode on such probabilities. His core idea is to abandon the murky middle ground and focus resources on the two extremes. One extreme is avoiding extreme risks. The other is chasing infinite gains to hedge against uncertainty. In this book, Nassim Nicholas Taleb provides a more detailed account of embracing extreme asymmetry. He did not provide such a detailed explanation in his previous book. And in this book, my grasp of rejecting the middle path will be a bit deeper. You see, the education we've received all along has emphasized the middle path. We love the way of the middle path. But in Nassim Nicholas Taleb's view, the flaw with the middle path is that it seeks balance between risk and reward. This often leads to a fragile state with both high risk and low returns. For instance, if we split our funds evenly between stocks and bonds, we might think, look, I'm not putting all my eggs in one basket. That's smart. Then, when a single stock experiences swings, I can bear the losses it brings, and they won't be too severe. But the issue here is that you still face stock market volatility without reaping outsized gains. This point truly gave me a rather different and profound realization. You see, the barbell structure he mentioned, 90% is safe, aiming for absolute stability. Completely avoid extreme losses, offering a floor for the system. For instance, when we invest, we put 90% of our funds into an extremely safe environment where they cannot be lost at all. Like treasury bonds or fixed-term deposits, no matter what you do, your 90% safety fund stays intact. So, for the safety of your overall wealth, this is extremely helpful. In any market swing, you still have funds to use and won't fall apart. Then there's a 10% allocated to extreme risk, deliberately exposed to high-risk assets, since high risk brings high returns. Even in the worst case, where this 10% is lost entirely, the loss would amount to just 10% of our total wealth. This 10% is acceptable for young people, making it a strategy with limited losses. And if that 10%, due to high risk, gained high returns, then that very 10% it could then bring us massive gains and huge returns of great magnitude. So we should pursue ventures with limitless gains, yet relatively low levels of uncertainty. This was a profound lesson for us, at least for me, and he also gave an example from the workplace. For instance, when we're working, we shouldn't aim to do just average jobs at some random company. If there's a job or career you truly wish to pursue, like writing books or something along those lines, you could research or become a travel blogger or something along those lines. The best is to have a calm, stable public sector job with ease. It can provide a baseline level of income. For us, for instance, even if you don't care about pay, the firm can still cover 5 social insurances and a housing fund. You still get a few thousand yet. It won't be hectic or cause much stress. At the same time, we can dedicate much of our spare time to high potential side jobs or skill development, like creating content for self-media, building apps on your own, or working in AI, or starting up in cross-border e-commerce. The time and effort you invest here are limited. But once the side hustle takes off, it could yield income far beyond your main job, and even shift your career path. So we should aim, if there's a career you wish to pursue, then this is the path to choose. I think back to my past career plans. The route through tech giants I once followed was essentially the middle path, neither stable nor ambitious enough. and I have no plan to save up for years, and then join SOEs in the future. So if this industry faces turbulence or a downturn in the future, I might then be ruthlessly weeded out during such transformations. Because with tech giants, there's also the 35 crisis, which might leave you jobless. Then, even if you had become a leader by then, if you weren't one of the top executives at the core, you'd still be quite at risk. And it seems it won't offer you stable dividends or anything akin to a choice along the middle path. And what is most important, because tech giants are busy, and they take up all my time from morning till night, so I have almost no time to pursue side jobs, especially with the immense work pressure that leaves you with none. It drains not just your time, but far more your very mental energy. For instance, after a long day, you get home at 11 p.m. and say you'll study for an hour. In truth, you have no extra energy left to learn, like a phone whose battery is completely drained. You have no time left at all to even bother studying. So this approach is indeed not good. Or if your goal is to make lots of money and pursue this middle path lifestyle, it simply isn't a fit for me. So this was a major lesson for me personally. But safety is something we must stress. Extreme safety is key, and its core is avoiding collapse. So we shouldn't pursue things that carry even moderate risk. That is strictly forbidden. For instance, let's take this investing. Our so-called extreme safety would not mean buying some stocks or funds, since at their core, these are still not entirely risk-free endeavors. So if we were to invest, we'd definitely buy treasury bonds or such. This aggressiveness must entail limited losses. And the losses we bear must be clearly bounded. For instance, if we invest 100,000 yuan, we must be ready to lose that sum. But at the same time, it won't exceed that 100,000. Even if it fails, it won't jeopardize the remaining 90% of my safety. Thus, this point is highly critical and deserves special emphasis. Don't try to keep your steady job while diving headfirst into startups, or you'll lose both ends. Alright, let's recap. The core of the belt structure lies in deliberately building uncertainty. This lets us maintain our core base while still seizing those extra gains in the face of uncertainty. And this is antifragility, the state where one does not fear volatility, but can harness it for growth. Lastly, build proactive nonlinear structures. Nonlinear is a term Nassim Nicholas Taleb used in antifragility's core math principles. The essence of antifragility is that systems show a positive, nonlinear response to volatility. This sounds abstract, but the concept is actually quite simple. How does a thing respond to shocks? For instance, when an event occurs, how does it react? There are roughly two types, linear and nonlinear. These two response patterns determine whether something is fragile, robust, or antifragile. What is linearity? It's 1 plus 1 equals 2. We put in one effort, get one gain, yet face great losses and immense pain. At the same time, its input and output are in direct ratio. And this state corresponds to resilience. Fluctuations neither benefit nor harm it, maintaining a steady equilibrium. There's also nonlinear response, where input and output aren't proportional, showing asymmetry. And this asymmetry we just mentioned determines whether something is fragile or antifragile. When input and output are proportional, there are two types, positive nonlinear and negative nonlinear. So this idea is still quite abstract to grasp clearly. But let me give an example. Say, you invest 100,000 RMB and can earn at most 10,000 RMB. But once it loses, it might drop by 50,000 RMB, meaning his losses would far outstrip our gains. Would outstrip gains effect. This is a negative nonlinear case. And positive nonlinear effects are clear gains, have a bigger impact than losses. That is to say, if we invest 100,000 RMB in a startup, the worst that could happen is we lose those 100,000 RMB. But if it succeeds, we might gain a million or even 10 million RMB. His losses are kept, but the gains he could reap are limitless. So what we're doing is this asymmetric setup limited risk, infinite gains, and that is antifragile at its core. So let's recap. To achieve antifragile, the key is to build proactive nonlinear structures. Let things show limited loss and boundless gains in a volatile environment. Does that still sound a bit basic? But once you think about it, it makes sense. Okay, let's recap. If we want to fight fragility, what are the 5 methods? The first step is to actively embrace stress just right. We must acknowledge that we might currently be in a fragile state, and we need to use just a bit of stress to make ourselves more resilient. Second, break your obsession with certainty and actively add randomness. If our lives are driven by an overzealous chase for certainty, they tend to be quite fragile. We must not fear change, nor any risk. Those who cling to the status quo and dread change are inherently fragile. To introduce fragility, one way is to create systematic rules, define intervention limits, and act decisively. Third, leave room to spare in life and build a buffer against risks. We shouldn't plan for everything with rigid rules. Do not see caged fish as a waste, for accidents will happen, and we cannot know when they will strike. Would we want to have one more option, one more way to fall back on? Caged fish indeed serves precisely this purpose. Fourth, embrace extremes, reject the middle path. Embrace extreme asymmetry. What we must reject is the vague middle ground. Allocate resources to both extremes. One is ultra risk-averse. The other aims for boundless gains to hedge against uncertainty. In the end, it means proactively building positive, nonlinear structures to pursue limited risk and infinite gains. The points I listed above are my own summaries. They may overlap somewhat. Like this check-in, the middle path, and positive nonlinear structure, they may overlap a bit. But I think that to help me grasp it better, and for everyone else to understand it better, I still broke it down. You can also reframe your understanding of this book or the underlying principles based on your own views. Okay, in the final part, we must still remind ourselves I am quite fragile. I watched on Bilibili a video on startup reflections its creators shared with genuine sincerity. They told me they had ample resources, had built up tens of thousands of users, and even 4,500 users, yet it still ended in failure. Why then? The final straw that broke them was just one thing. The investor funding ran dry. This incident highlights precisely why fragile thinking is so critical. Many people, including the founder, failed to realize that their business structure and model were in fact extremely fragile. They failed to grasp the core of the issue. Why? Because the product wasn't profitable, their sole income came from investor funds. But even more critical is that this firm employs over 30 staff. That cost is way too high. In my view, their product isn't complex. It's an AI-based video editing tool, a software utility. But having a team of over 30 is in itself a gravely flawed business move. Let's do the math. Suppose an employee earns just 5,000 RMB monthly plus the 5 social insurances and housing fund costs. Just for staff costs, the firm spends nearly 200k a month. Plus venue rent, utility bills, and marketing costs. Just imagine how high his monthly fixed costs must be. So you see, each month you burn like dozens of tens. Your sole revenue source. Your product isn't profitable, so you must rely on investors. Why would they fund you? Or perhaps the senior has deemed there's no way. There truly isn't. Thus, this single and unhealthy revenue stream. This high-cost model is inherently rife with fragility and instability. He is deeply reliant on outside funds. Like a patient who lives on an oxygen tank, the moment it is removed, their entire system would collapse in an instant. An investor's cash flow drying up is never a black swan event. It is in fact a highly likely occurrence. Just whether it strikes you or not, and when, early or late, is the hallmark of this fragile mode. A delay was one, or perhaps his training was an inevitable outcome. So we must always remind ourselves that we are inherently fragile. This isn't to amplify our anxieties, but to spot risks early and proactively build antifragile resilience. This is vital. So both of us, those of you who listen to this episode, and I ourselves, should now reflect on whether our lives are fragile. What parts in our lives have we overlooked? Those truly fragile aspects we must now recognize and address proactively. Well, that's it for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in. See you all next time.